Today on Locked on Rockies. If there's a plan this offseason with the Colorado Rockies, we're going to find out. And we're going to find out if they're sticking with that plan with Patrick Lyons.
You are Locked on Rockies, your daily Colorado Rockies podcast. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Rock on Rockies fans, welcome into the Locked on Rockies podcast for today, the 29th day of November. I was about to say February. How was I going February? What a random month to get confused there. But we got your Black Friday special here on Locked on Rockies. Talking some deals. We'll be talking deals that weren't made with the Colorado Rockies because I'm trying to make sense of this Brendan Rodgers news with Patrick Lyons. He is part of justbaseball.com. He's also the other guy doing daily Rockies talk. It ain't just the Locked on Rockies podcast that's giving you daily Colorado Rockies talk. You're getting insights from the clubhouse, from a guy that's been following the team for really as long as I can remember, Patrick Lyons, the Rockies Insider podcast as well. How's that going? Talking Rocks every day is a blast, isn't it?
It is. It definitely can be. I didn't even realize that earlier this week I had already hit the 100th episode on the podcast side of things. I'm up to about 60 over on the YouTube, the Rockies Insider channel. And it's been a lot of fun. And doing it every single day, sometimes you're trying to get blood from the stone. And that's one of the reasons why here we are a week later. And it's still like, well, you know what? There's still some meat on this Brendan Rodgers bone. Like we're all doing it. We're all in the same boat. And it is, legitimately an interesting topic. So I thank you for having the competition on. But I tell you, competition makes us both better. And I think the numbers have shown that.
Hey, absolutely. And I'm also in the camp of my show's a lot better because of great people in the Rockies media sphere that do wonderful work that brings us great coverage. So I love talking to you guys because, I tell fans, you're at the ballpark. You're in the press box. I am a guy that watches Rockies baseball religiously because it's what I love to do. So I'm not talking to players. I don't have any of that. So I got to be talking to people like yourself to make sure that I'm getting the pulse because hold on. I got to make sure we're having too much fun. Just got to let you know today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Patrick, I wanted to start here from your relationship with the Rockies players or just what you know about their relationship. How big of a locker clubhouse shakeup is this going to be for the Rockies organization who have loved Brendan Rodgers? That's been no secret. And Cal Quantrill, I think, came in and made an impact. What you can say with maybe the second half, not so much, but made headlines for some fun games against some big teams, had some moments there. How much are how different will the Rockies clubhouse be going into spring training this year?
Well, the absence of Cal Quantrill is going to be interesting because you talk to someone like a Ryan McMahon, and every few weeks or so, invariably, there's a reference to learning how to play the game the right way, one of those cliched quotes, but learning how to play the game the right way, learning about the business side of baseball, learning about how to become a big leaguer from the likes of Ian Desmond and Daniel Murphy. And as long ago as that was, Ian Desmond still had that impact on Ryan McMahon, despite only being in Colorado for 3 years. Daniel Murphy, only around for 2 seasons, and they're not even 2 full seasons. One of them was a pandemic season. So those guys have had an impact. And I think Cal Quantrill, the verdict, we'll wait and find out exactly what ends up happening. But I think a lot of the young guys in the rotation, maybe some in the bullpen, will have similar stories to tell because Cal Quantrill was an absolute bulldog. He did not care a single bit what his ERA was. No starting pitcher at least wants to admit that they care what their ERA was, but he had this mental fortitude about him that I'm not going to say was a breath of fresh air, but it was just, I am trying to win a ball game. And on a given day, I might need to go 6 innings after giving up 5 runs in the second inning. That's part of my job. It's not, you know what, I'll live to play another day. I'm going to kind of leave it all out there on the line tonight in this game. And that bulldog mentality, I think, is going to do wonders for a lot of the younger guys in the staff. There are not too many in the rotation. So that's why I said maybe more the bullpen guys, the young guys who worked with him in spring training. But Brendan Rodgers, fabric of the clubhouse, 6 years since his promotion in 2019, had one of the coveted corner lockers by the end of his tenure. And he's played with all of these guys. They've all played with each other for such a very long time. And now you look around and it's, some of the old guard still there, the Freelands, McMahon, Marquez, Senzatella. And honestly, that's really it. Sam Hilliard was around. He debuted in 2019 after leaving and coming back. But then you've got another quarter of the roster, or all the young guys, all the prospects, probably more than a quarter at that point. And then you've got the veteran guys, the Owen Millers, the Kyle Farmers that are, coming up and just trying to fill a spot to keep the seat ready for those young players on the come up. So the clubhouse dynamic is going to change a little bit. I don't think it's going to be dramatic. It is a pretty laid back clubhouse that is governed by the players. So now, without having Charlie Blackmon, who's a quiet leader, but he's the captain,
right?
Bard, also a leader for those young guys in the bullpen, and even some of the more veteran guys. He just is an established big leaguer, and now somebody that has 6+ seasons under his belt as a big leaguer, and Brendan Rodgers now is not going to be a part of that clubhouse. So they continue to get younger and younger, despite the fact that, they did bring in a 34-year-old second baseman.
And that 34-year-old second baseman is going to play more than we think. I mean, at least that's I see Jake Cave right there all over again. And so, Patrick, give me your initial reaction. I'm not surprised that Cal Quantrill and Brendan Rodgers are no longer Colorado Rockies. That's not the surprising part. It's the non-tendering walk-in free agency. And again, Homer, whatever you want to call me, I will totally own up to it. I sat here thinking that there's just no way that Brendan Rodgers was not worth any. There's no way there was no deal for those guys. I just don't believe it. There's no way that a team wasn't interested in a package deal of a starter and a second baseman at the deadline, especially when you consider Cal Quantrill was a better pitcher in the first half versus the second half of the season. And Brendan Rodgers was playing his best baseball of the year around the trade deadline, doing basically what we're used to him. Slow start, scorching, and then, we'll see how the end of the season figures out. Am I off? Is it wrong for us to get like our ideas thinking that Rockies players have value, trade value? Not even a flyer. You can get Greg Jones for in a Joe Rock trade, but you can't do a Brendan Rodgers, Cal Quantrill trade. Something in my brain just isn't adding up with this stuff.
Yeah, it certainly is perplexing. As you said, package those two guys again. We're cherry picking now, knowing what we know about the Rockies' finances, which they knew about, and they knew going to this offseason that they were going to have to slash payroll. And any team that Rodgers and Quantrill would have been traded to, the devil's advocate is, well, yeah, they wouldn't have wanted to pay them, the nearly $15 million that they would have been set to make combined, but they could have done the same thing. They could have non-tendered those players and not guaranteed them that money. And so they would have had a rental for 2 months of a decent bat and a decent glove in Brendan Rodgers with some upside. He's going to probably have to maybe play a little bit of third base. Maybe he goes into a corner outfield. Maybe you don't like that, his defensive flexibility because of somewhat of an inability to stay healthy. So you could kind of understand that. But look, there are some teams that are desperate, and there are some teams that want to at least look like they are adding players, and you could have done that with Brendan Rodgers. Same thing with Cal Quantrill. If you were aggressive at the point in which he had 3.2 wins above replacement, I think after his June 27th start, that was second in the National League in terms of wins above replacement. Right? I know you've been on that train, and and you go, well, some of the analytics suggest that maybe he was lucky and not enough of his fly balls, went out for homers. So again, there's some luck, and teams know that, but you can't have enough starting pitching. So while he might have been the ace of the Rockies staff, maybe he's a number 4 or 5 starter for a contender, but contenders need number 4 or 5 starters. And if the Rockies would have accepted anything, they could have got it done. The sticking point, I think, for me is, in a vacuum, you can say you had to let go, you had to non-tender Rodgers and Quantrill. And right now, yeah, that makes sense. But then when you go back and look and say, well, you could have done something in the summertime. And Bill Schmidt said to Patrick Saunders ultimately that, hey, we tried, but we couldn't find anything. I have been reached out to by several Rockies fans, some season ticket holders, who said their problem with that is you would have to, I'm not going to say dispel disbelief, but you have to trust that that's actually true. If that is true, that's what we're talking about, right, Paul, is how could they have actually gotten nothing if they tried? Do we actually know that they tried? You want to think that they did. And if you're a fan, you want to think that way, because your mind might explode to live in a world in which, your general manager and your owner weren't looking to try to get better for the future, or at least save some money now to bank for next season and make you better next season, and spend that money. Maybe you expand the analytics department. There's all kind of trickle down economics that go on with this. So for those fans out there that say, I don't actually trust this front office, they haven't given you enough, I think, to trust. And so if you have those doubts that maybe they didn't try hard enough, maybe they didn't accept an offer when they could have. We know that they can overvalue their players. Doesn't mean they didn't have any offers.
Do you have any evidence of that?
The offers they got.
That's what people I hear a lot. Overvalue. And again, I'm overvaluing too. I think Brendan Rodgers has a couple more 4 wins above replacement seasons in him. I think his upside is still great. Is it the overvaluing? Is that it? Where do you think, Avi, I don't know how much you might know, but like, do you think the Rockies were like, I'm not interested in these couple of AA guys, that you drafted in the 5th or 6th round for this. I'm not in, and we're not in. We drafted Brendan Rodgers in the top 5 of the draft. He's won a Gold Glove when he's fully healthy and played a full season of healthy ball. He's been an elite second baseman. Do you think that was the case for the Rockies, or because that's what I think it is. I don't believe that there was nothing, but I do believe the Rockies stuck their nose up to some deals that they, in hindsight, could have gotten a couple of players and see what happens.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I think the Rockies do care a lot about those narratives. And, even if Brendan Rodgers wasn't worth a ton out on the trade market, which, again, we know since the end of the season until last Friday, I can't believe it's been a week now, that we've gone since the non-tender deadline when they let Brendan Rodgers go, that in that month-long period, they weren't able to swing a deal. We knew that Rodgers and Quantrill were on the trade market, but teams also knew that bluff that all teams do. It's not just the Rockies of, hey, we'll trade you this guy if you can give us X, Y, and Z. But teams know you're cutting payroll. We know the finances aren't good since AT&T Sportsnet went away. So you're going to have to cut some payroll. We'll take our chances. We can probably replicate that cheaper somewhere else anyway. So we don't need to give you anything for someone like a Brendan Rodgers, especially when second base is a spot where you can replicate and you can have platoons with utility players. So I think that narrative of, there's those Rockies fans that will say, like, he's still the 3rd overall pick. He's still the guy that came right after Swanson and Bregman. Again, different situation, college players versus high school. I went over earlier this week on the Rockies Insider podcast that Brendan Rodgers, not a bust, because there are plenty of guys who get taken in the 1st round that never even make it to the majors, let alone win a Gold Glove award, let alone hit 3 homers in a game and provide what Brendan Rodgers was able to provide. So there are fans going, hey, we're trading another one of our guys. Well, did we trade $50 million over to the Seattle Mariners in the Rodgers deal? Like, I think they might be worried about that a little bit too much. And I also think part of the math on the Rockies side of things, besides the overvaluing, is it wouldn't surprise me if one of the factors in coming together on certain deals, both this year's deadline and maybe not as much last year in 2023 when they made all those trades, but would the Rockies rather have Rodgers and have an increased likelihood of only, quote unquote, losing 99 games, or you turn over the keys to Aaron Schunk, who might not be ready yet at El Amador? He looked okay when he first came up, still wasn't ready for the majors, and you lose 100 or more games and you get a prospect. You can see how a team would want to snap that 100 loss streak, and let's just keep this guy because the prospect we're getting really isn't going to be a huge needle mover. You say that, and you look at what they did in 2021 and 2022, essentially nothing at the trade deadline, and they were left exposed in 2023 and 2024 with lack of depth, which is why they lost 100 games in the first place. So I don't know that they've necessarily learned from their lesson, and take 50 cents on the dollar, because right now you got nothing for an asset that you had that, was valuable, really valuable at one point.
Yeah. And fans will, JT Realmuto could have been a Rocky. That's the other thing and I believe I might've seen it on your stuff too. I've seen it. The Brendan Rodgers, again, it's just another moment in which a Rockies player that had, and say what you will, but a Rockies player leaves unceremoniously, and the future is murky by it. Again, hey, if you're embracing Amador this year and you want to go Tovar route like you did with him, and you're going to say, here's the young middle infield and we're going to go for it, I am okay with that. It's just, I think that initial tough pill to swallow of, wow, Brendan Rodgers, a guy that, never hit the ceiling that we wanted, but did contribute, because you nailed it too. Brendan Rodgers will contribute to another baseball team and will continue his baseball career. I believe that wholeheartedly. But it just, for it to pan out just like John Gray, just like all these other guys that have just walked from the Rockies, I can see why Rockies fans are so frustrating. So I just want to, we'll dive into a little bit more of the impacts here coming up. And I just want to know, from what you're hearing or what you've been following, if the Rockies, this is the plan the Rockies set out in place, and if they're sticking with it. And I'd like to get a little more insight too, and what you know about the numbers, about what the Rockies are facing. We're going to do that coming up in segment number 2 of today's episode of Locked On Rockies. Before we do that, though, got to tell you about the folks that help make this show possible, and that includes Gametime. Gametime is the best spot for you to get your tickets, not only for sports, but all the shows, comedy, anything in your area. Gametime's got you covered, and Gametime's got a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. They got the all-in pricing feature that you can toggle when you get to that front page there, so you are going to know exactly what you're paying up front, no fees popping up and surprising you there at the end. My favorite part, you're going to get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy, so you're going to know exactly where you're going to sit. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. We are, as I'm clicking the right buttons there now, finally here, joined by Patrick Lyons here on a nice Friday here episode of Locked On Rockies, just breaking down the moves the Rockies made, moving on from Brendan Rodgers and the inability to get a deal done. I think the one thing that that stuck out to me about what you were telling us is Rockies changing the narrative. Yet they don't do much to try to change the narrative, Patrick. They don't. I really find it hard to believe, and maybe this makes me too much of a basher of the front office, but I don't think other teams bring their manager back in back-to-back 100-loss seasons. I don't believe you bring your pitching coach back time and time again when your pitching staff has been at the bottom. And I understand the depth and everything, like you mentioned there, totally understandable. And we'll see what the Rockies with Bud Black and German Marquez and Antonio Senzatella look like, what that will be for this team. But I'm watching this team go through this offseason, and I'm seeing them just kind of hit all the narratives that they usually hit. Not much about changing the narrative.
Yeah, I think right now there are certain limitations that the front office has that I'm not going to say we don't know, because we do know that there are some issues right now with the payroll. Right now, they're around $121 million. And other than the 60-game season in 2020 and the 2021 season, when, remember, attendances were limited, right? They were down. So that was under 121. Otherwise, this is going to be, the lowest payroll they've had since 2017. So I think there is this pressure between the roster and the front office, and they can't really do much about the 26-man roster and the 40-man roster to a degree. So bringing back Bud Black, a guy who can deal with that and kind of suffer through those growing pains of the young players and of the front office too, I think in many ways that works out. That's, we talk a lot about the Rockies bringing in these veteran guys, these clubhouse guys, right? Bud Black is a clubhouse manager where, you bring in a young, brash, up-and-coming manager. There could be a butting of heads because, hey, I want this to happen. I want the team to go in this route, in this direction. And, hey, if the front office can't really oblige, if the front office can't really make those changes because there are certain financial constraints, then that's going to be bad. That is now becomes a bad narrative. That is bad press that the Rockies don't want. They do plenty of their own bad press, but not the kind of bad press of like, having controversial people in the clubhouse or on the roster. They avoid that in a major way. And so I think bringing Bud Black back, it seemed shocking because they had lost back-to-back 100 loss seasons. And I did look this up, did talk about this on the Rockies Insider, that this is really the fourth time that it's ever happened. Happened 3 times in the expansion era in the 60s and 70s. So you're talking about a brand new team starting from scratch where they lost 100 games 2-3 years in a row. We're not going to count that. We're not going to count Connie Mack doing it with the Philadelphia A's. He owned the team. He's not going to fire himself. Fred Tenney, there's another example. The original Boston Braves. He was a player manager, so he was doing 2 jobs for the price of 1. So that's fine if you lose 100 games 3 years in a row. So really, in the modern day era, it's actually become somewhat common. Derek Shelton lost 100 games 2 years in a row with the Pirates, still employed. Oakland Athletics, Mark Kotsay lost 100 games 2 years in a row, still employed. Different city, but still employed. So, I'm not saying that it's right, but it's just not as strange as it would seem on the surface. And so I think trying to just navigate these really choppy waters that the Rockies currently have, keeping status quo might be what's best for them. You certainly can argue otherwise, but I think that's the rationale of why they decided to keep status quo with Bud Black for 2025.
Yeah, because it sets the stage for, you're going to have to do something at the end of this next season. You have a lot of young guys that you're going to figure out who you're going to keep, who you're going to commit to. What are you going to do? Ryan McMahon, that's another year off the McMahon contract. And I know there's still, I think it'd be like 3-ish, something like that. But, things will start moving where you're going to face a situation where you got to add to this team. If Doyle and Tovar and hopefully Jones Bowles back, there is talent on this Rockies roster. They all just need to develop more. So there is some sense there to be sticking with the guy, especially we know that Bud Black and the players get along. The relationship between Bud Black and the players is clearly something that the fans don't get as much, don't focus in on as much. And that's a big deal for them as the organization. So I will give them credit for that. Patrick, you've mentioned the financials a little bit. And I've mentioned this briefly just from speculation. I doubt a lot of people signed up for that streaming service this year. I find it very hard, specifically for the Rockies. And I don't know how that would, shakes out if you buy the whole league thing and, revenue sharing and all that stuff. But with it, 1, the product on the field, 2, Colorado sports fans being so tired and over and done with, where do I watch my team? Where do I go? Do I watch it on here? And the fact that they didn't announce the streaming service until the season started, right? I believe it was like 2 days before opening day. They were like, hey, by the way, you can come watch it. It's a big deal, right? That loss of local TV revenue has to be massive for this team.
I want to say, I think some of the numbers that I remember seeing on the Padres in 2023, they and the Diamondbacks were the first 2 to get dropped by their broadcasting partner, have their broadcasting partner go away. I want to say they made like $2 million, which is nothing. And whereas the Rockies were supposed to get $57 million from AT&T Sportsnet. So that is a big drop. As you mentioned,
that's a contract right there. $57 million, $52 million difference. That's maybe multiple contracts.
Oh yeah, that's 3 guys making $15 million, right? That the middle to upper middle free agents that are now off the table, and money you can't reinvest back into analytics and the lab that like you got down in Scottsdale, their spring training facility at Salt River Field. So the finances, I think, are probably a much bigger component right now than I think a lot of us maybe are realizing, and in a different market in which 2.5, 2.6 million people aren't showing up to the ballpark to watch a 100 loss team. In any other city, you're going to be under 2 million and you're going to be hurting even more financially. So that announcement that they made right before the start of the season, what I heard was, oh, actually you didn't need Rockies.tv. It's already going to be a part of your cable package. So like for my parents, they are already getting it. They just turned it on. It was on the same channel. There was just nothing else on their TV all day long. So I think maybe they were hoping to try to bring in a couple extra bucks for that. But in general, there's not a ton of folks that do watch the Rockies at home in this market in general. And in Colorado, look, people are going out in the summer. Like they'll go to a game, But then after that, they're not thinking about the Rockies for another 2-3 weeks until that next homestand when they want to go back out, have $16 beers up in the rooftop and, talk about what team are the Rockies playing right now? I don't know. We're having a good time. We're at the world's biggest singles bar here up in the rooftop. So I think the financials are, again, probably a much bigger pressing matter right now than we all realize. But maybe that's the beauty of having such a young roster, is that you don't have to worry about paying a lot of these guys right now.
Yeah, that is the right now. You don't have to worry as much. You can figure out and start building that hype. Obviously, my big takeaway from that is, that them sponsor patches, they're coming to the Rockies a lot sooner than you think. I would say, Patrick, we're going to take one more quick break, and I just want to see if from what you've heard, if so far the actions the Rockies have made stick to the plans. Maybe you can give some insight into some of the people, the folks that the Rockies have brought in, because they haven't had a completely quiet offseason, under the radar moves, but they have made some. We're going to do that coming up next year after a quick break. Before we do that, though, got to tell you about the folks that help make this show possible, and that includes FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. If you want to get in on all the exciting Broncos action, Bo and them boys, right now you can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. We are joined today by Patrick Lyons. You might know him from Just Baseball. You might know him from the Rockies Insider Podcast, Daily Rockies Talk. Two people talking Rocks daily. It's a collab of the century here. Patrick, we only just have a couple more minutes left here. Are the Rockies sticking to what they wanted their offseason plan to be? Maybe we didn't know about it going in, but we knew payroll cuts were coming. We knew changes were coming. From what you understand, have the Rockies followed what you anticipated them doing this offseason?
Yeah, it's been pretty boilerplate. Again, other than the surprise from last week with Rogers and Quantrill getting cut, or at least just the shock of, wow, they're really doing this thing, or they really are turning the keys over to the kids. They're doing what they had started to do at the end of last year. Let the kids play. They still have an incredibly young roster. The only change on the coaching staff is Dustin Garneau coming in as the bullpen coach. They're going to be down an extra assistant hitting coach after PJ Piliteri was let go, in addition to Reed Cornelius, the bullpen coach. So Dustin Garneau, a guy who's been with the organization for a while, was somewhat of a roving instructor last year. So got to touch on a lot of those minor league players, and has some familiarity already. Anytime you have a catcher in the bullpen, could be a future manager. So I think that's a decent pickup for the coaching staff. The 40-man roster, other than a lot of the vets that you've discussed, from the Jimmy Hergets to Owen Millers and Kyle Farmer, Zach Veen added to the 40-man roster. So he's now, one call away from finally making his major league debut, which I thought I had the date picked out in August of 2023. The previous offseason, I said, no, this is going to be the day. Injuries, unfortunately, got in the way. Life is what happens when you're busy making plans. And he'll finally be able to make that debut this year. And like I said, letting the kids play. And, you see that in the contracts that the Rockies signed Jacob Stallings to and Kyle Farmer, because both of those players have incentives where if they hit so many games played or so many plate appearances, the player gets an extra $125,000, $200,000. So that is a tax that the Rockies are essentially putting on themselves to say, shoot, if we don't give playing time to these young guys, if we don't make sure that we get Goodman and Romo playing at least 80 games, we're going to have to pay more money to Stallings if he hits 80, if he hits 90, if he hits 100 games played. So that is a tax, and that is a penalty for the Rockies for not following through and giving more playing time to either those two players or someone else that you might have in your system to catch games. Same thing for Kyle Farmer. If he reaches however many plate appearances, well, that means you didn't find a way to get Aaron Schunk additional playing time, or even Owen Miller just as a stopgap to save you a couple bucks. So they've kind of implemented a tax on themselves that they should be able to be fine without tapping into, so that they can save some money. Because if not, if Kyle Farmer ends up getting 500, 550 plate appearances this year, he'll make his maximum. He'll make about $4.5 million guaranteed, which may end up being what Brendan Rodgers makes on the open market. And really, the Rockies would have only saved $1 million if that comes to fruition. So they're betting on themselves, and they're betting on their young players to take those spots from the veterans in Stallings and Kyle Farmer. Certainly like the odds maybe a little bit better at second base than catcher, but in both spots, you got at least two really good young candidates, rookies, that can usurp the veterans. So I think they're sticking to their plan to force themselves in more ways than one to let the kids play.
I mean, you know what? I like that thought process, though. You know what? Hey, because if we got to stick to the guy we signed, the player benefits, they get their money, it works. Then if the Rockies, though, they save the money, then they're prioritizing the young guys. I think that's a system that could work, but I ain't gonna hold my breath. I got Farmer taking plenty of at bats this year just because of how we do it. I don't want to dive too much into that. Just before you go, one thing I've talked a ton about this offseason, right field. What are the Rockies going to do? Because I'm assuming Nolan Jones is going to be given the benefit of the doubt. If he's healthy, they're going to put him back out there. They're going to want to recreate the first season of Nolan Jones. We saw some signs of that towards the end of the season as well. But right field, golly, there's a lot of people that could be playing that position.
I think they might have a 5-man platoon just in right field. So every time the right field spot comes up in the order, just pinch hitter. It's Yanquiel Fernandez, then Sean Bouchard. No, I think probably going into the season, it's going to be Sean Bouchard and Sam Hilliard platooning in right field. We'll find out here in less than 2 weeks, in about a week really, until we get to the winter meetings. I'll be down there in Dallas. Maybe they'll be able to kick the tires on another veteran to bring in. But Sean Bouchard, despite the fact he doesn't have a ton of service time, is somewhat of a veteran presence, has a great at-bat, takes a lot of pitches. You could kind of say he's a poor man's Connor Joe, probably not as good of a defender in right field. Sam Hilliard, you saw what he was able to do last year from the left side. So those two guys keeping the seat warm for Jordan Beck, who you got to think is probably going to start the year in AAA. Same thing with Zach Veen, same thing with Yanquiel Fernandez, so that those guys can get regular playing time. And then when the time is right, they can take off, shoot out like a cannon, and get regular playing time in right field. So that will be a really fun story to watch in spring training. And for you and I, the only two on the Daily Beat talking about the Rockies every day, that's actually some good fodder, right? Who are you putting your money on, right? One guy's going to maybe start the year on the opening day roster. One guy's going to start in AAA, and the other could be a very intriguing trade chip. Yanquiel Fernandez, Zach Veen, Jordan Beck, three of them that are AAA ready. They're AAA dudes right now. So what's going to happen with them? We've got a couple months to try to milk that thing dry.
My last question for you here. Chris Bryant plays how many innings? Not game. I'm not talking about games. I'm not even going to. How many innings of defense do the Rockies have Chris Bryant out for, and why is it more than 0?
Ooh, why is it more than 0? It's more than 0 just because of logistics, and you burn your DH, and he's got to go out to play a little bit of right field. So I think that's probably why
they're going to put him back out there, huh? They're going to have him go back out there. He's going to hit, the fly ball's going to hit, and all of us are going to hold our breaths because we hope he doesn't twist the wrong way and mess up that back.
I think that's an emergency. That's break if emergency only, and then it potentially breaks again. But I think that the game plan is DH only. Try to minimize his time. You could get some. I'm not going to say phantom ILs, but look, his back issue is serious enough that it's just something that it's going to plague him the rest of his playing career. So if he hits somewhat of a slump, and again, one of those young guys are ready to come up, then Bouchard, boom, you slide to DH. Hilliard, maybe those guys are almost a DH platoon, and then the Beck, Yanquiel, Veen, you've got as your starting right fielder until Brian is a little bit healthier and he can kind of come back But I think the plan is for him to be DH. Looking forward to hearing from Bill Schmidt and Buddy and the rest of the front office down in Dallas at the winter meetings, because the game plan is for the Rockies trainers to keep a much closer eye on Kris Bryant this offseason to make sure that his rehabilitation is going well so that they can count on him for 100 games. I mean, it's crazy to think that 100 games would be a success. But at this point, for a guy who's still sitting at 159, he's still yet to play 162 games with the Colorado Rockies, and we are entering season number 4. So they are going to protect him. They're going to handle him with kid gloves. But this offseason, they really got to make sure that he's doing what he needs to do as far as his rehab process is concerned. So I'm really looking forward to getting somewhat more of an update down in Dallas here pretty soon.
And we've heard how frustrating it. Again, people have been critical of Bryant. Let's not shy away from that. We've heard from how tough it has been for Kris Bryant. I like to hear that. I think DH is the best spot for Kris Bryant to succeed as a Rocky, to get the confidence and hopefully get that swing back. Patrick, we're out of time. We could talk plenty more, even though we're hitting that slow part of the offseason. But like you said, winter meetings right around the corner. That means they got to stay up to date with you and all your coverage. Where can they go to make sure that they are staying up to date with all things Patrick and all things Colorado Rockies?
Yeah, X, TikTok, Blue Sky, Threads, you name it, at Patrick D. Lyons or at Patrick D. Lyons or at Rockies Insider. And we're having fun on the social medias. This is really where we shine, right? Because you got to get creative. It's easy. It's easy to talk about, Brendan Rodgers and Cal Quantrill. They're right there, or do post-game recaps. It's there for us. But when you got to be creative and put on that creative cap when it comes to Colorado, that's where you and I shine and we have fun.
Yep. But hey, we're going to keep fans excited because there is stuff to be excited for, folks. If you like the show here, we're the Locked On Rockies podcast. You can find us, me here. Patrick's got his own, all sorts of stuff. I host Locked On Rockies podcast. Find us on the Locked On Rockies YouTube channel. Be part of the show. Fire off your Rockies hot takes and all that good stuff. Patrick, we got to keep it interesting because the Rockies, man, there's a lot of fun stuff going on in Colorado sports right now. And the Rockies got to make sure that they start being one of those things again. Patrick, thank you so much again for your time. Really do appreciate it. And folks, until next time, this has been the Locked On Rockies podcast.